Howdy, this is Lemmy with RevZilla, here to talk to you today about how to purchase OEM motorcycle parts. Before we get into how to select and purchase these parts, let's first talk about what OEM parts actually are. OEM stands for Original Equipment Manufacturer. You may also hear these called factory parts or genuine parts, but these are the parts that your motorcycle was born with. Now, these are in contrast to something like an aftermarket part, which is usually made by an outside company and generally affects and modifies the performance of your motorcycle. Whereas these are produced either by your vehicle manufacturer or instead they're selected by your vehicle manufacturer, made by other suppliers, specifically to preserve the characteristics of your machine. Essentially, OEM parts are the parts you want to use on your bike if you loved the way your bike performed right off the factory floor. Now, there's a couple different ways to get your hands on the right pieces for your bike. Now, like nearly every other manufactured product in the world, motorcycles are composed of a number of parts, and each of those parts are assigned a number by the manufacturer. The easiest way to grab an OEM part at RevZilla is to simply take your OEM part number, throw it into the search bar, and we will display that part for you. Now, you may be wondering where you can get that part number. There's a couple different places you can grab these. You may have seen something come from a dealer network. Perhaps you've gotten a parts estimate and you have dealer part numbers on there. You can use those. You sometimes will find the part number either molded or cast or perhaps tagged onto a part itself. And you may also see those part numbers in a service manual or perhaps a factory parts manual. So that's probably the most simple way to get your hands onto a part. Now, some of you are saying, well, Lem, what if I don't have my factory part number? And that's a very valid question. Not every single part necessarily has a part number cast or molded into it. And there's also plenty of parts too where you need to grab a couple different things and you may not have access to those numbers. So there's a better way. For those of you who don't have your OEM part number handy, you're going to want to navigate to our Shop by Bike feature. The quickest way to do that is to look under the OEM tab on the homepage. There you'll see quick access to the OEM parts section of RevZilla.com broken up by motorcycle manufacturer. These will take you to the OEM page from that particular manufacturer, which hosts the Shop by Bike feature. You'll be prompted to enter the year, model, as well as potentially submodel. It's mission critical that you get the right information here, simply because obviously parts are going to be different for different types and years of motorcycle. From there, we're going to show you a list of subsystems on your motorcycle so you can correctly identify the subsystem that you're working on and easily and quickly find the part. Now, from there, in those subsystems, we're going to show you what are known as fiches. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with the term fiche, it's generally the shorthand term used for what is effectively an exploded parts diagram. It's going to show you all of the parts within a given subassembly on your motorcycle and will allow you to correctly identify the parts that you're going to need. Even though fiches are a very powerful tool, there's a number of ways to make mistakes when you're ordering parts for your bike. So what I'd like to do now is walk you through sort of an example order to show you some of those common pitfalls that have tripped up riders who've come before you. Now you can see we've got our trusty House R6 here, which for illustrative purposes has undergone a little parking lot mishap. We've got a couple of busted up parts in here. Note that we've got a damaged brake lever, a turn signal that's seen better days, and a muffler over here that is bearing some proof of an unfortunate mishap. Now each of these pieces kind of has its own unique scenario, I think, that can help teach a couple of important lessons. So let's start things off with that brake lever. So we're looking at an OEM replacement brake lever here. Now some of you will say, Lem, why don't we stick an aftermarket unit on there? And there's a couple reasons we might not want to do that. Firstly, all we've got here is a damaged brake lever, so we can purchase one brake lever from Yamaha. If you're looking into an aftermarket lever set, unless you're willing to have mismatched levers, you're going to need to buy two levers, the matching clutch side as well. So we're going to save a little money by going with an OEM lever here. Another item to consider too is the labor. Since we're going to replace like with like, we can simply swap out the brake lever. It's a very fast job. Were we to get an aftermarket set of levers, we'd also be replacing the clutch lever, which is going to require a quick clutch adjustment, etc. It's going to add add time onto the job, which of course we're not looking for. Another important lesson I think that's interesting here too, the particular fiche for this brake lever has a directional arrow on it. It gives you the orientation of the motorcycle. Now if you look at the fiche, of course, these are exploded parts diagrams. The parts just tend to hover there in space, which is obviously not how they live in the real world. The directional arrows can be helpful. It's also helpful for those of you too who may have a part number and want to see how this actually sets up on the motorcycle. Yamaha describes this as lever 1. That's not really immediately clear whether it's a clutch lever, a brake lever, or something else entirely. So accessing the fiche and understanding that there are directional arrows to help you get your bearings with the motorcycle can be important to know. Next, we'll move down to our turn signal here. Now, when assessing the damage, note that both our lens is busted up here, but the body of the turn signal is broken as well. Now, I would elect to replace this with an OEM turn signal for sort of the same reasons we went with OEM on the brake lever. First, let's think about the cost. We have one damaged turn signal, but the other 3 are fine on this motorcycle. Let's also consider the labor here too. As it stands now, with an OEM piece, we can replace 1 turn signal. If we move into the aftermarket, we're going to be replacing 4. Not to mention, many aftermarket turn signals leave you to figure out the wiring. Because this is an OEM piece, it's going to be plug and play. All we need to do is simply install that turn signal, hook it into the factory harness, and we're set to fly. Now, another interesting piece you might want to know when you're ordering this is if we look at this particular turn signal on the parts fiche, you'll notice that in addition to being able to purchase some of these pieces individually, there's also a ring drawn around a couple of those pieces with its own number coming off it. That's because this can be purchased as a sub-assembly. Now, normally, if we had busted just one of these pieces, we might opt to just buy that piece. However, in this case, 2 of the 3 pieces are broken in the sub-assembly we need. So it's going to be easier, faster, and possibly even a little bit more affordable to simply purchase the entire sub-assembly. Now we're going to round things out with our muffler. This is actually one piece where I would say the OEM replacement is probably not the way to fly here. Yamaha wants over $1,000 for that muffler. Seems a little steep for a parking lot drop. However, if we look to the aftermarket section of RevZilla.com, I can find a Yoshimura unit that's going to run less than half that. Obviously, for many riders, that's going to be an economical option. Now, another thing I do want to point out, we're going to replace a single muffler here. But let's pretend this was your bike and maybe you wanted to shoot the moon and get a full system exhaust. When you were doing that, you would obviously want to replace the header gaskets. Now, one thing to remember is that there's 4 of those on this motorcycle. It can be very easy to order an incorrect quantity. So one of the things you'll notice when you're shopping on the site is that there are recommended quantities. When you're getting ready to replace a part on the motorcycle, getting held up on the job simply because you don't have 1 or 2 small pieces that you may have ordered incorrectly can be a real bummer. Now that should do it for most of you folks. At this point, all we need to do is head over to our shopping cart where our OEM and our aftermarket pieces will be displayed all in the same area. Hopefully, those of you who've watched this video feel a little bit more confident grabbing some OEM parts, and if you don't, that's okay too. Get in touch with one of our very friendly gear geeks should you need any help. 877-792-9455 will get you a live human being on the horn. Of course, you can always drop us an email as well, cs@revzilla.com. We're here to help. As always, I'm Lem. I'm out of here.